Within 2 years of daily use, the white lead powder turned the skin a bruised grayish blue. The women who wore it knew only one solution: more powder. Thicker layers, applied every morning to conceal the damage caused by yesterday's application, which had been applied to conceal the damage from the day before. The cycle had no exit. The women of the Imperial Harem were poisoning themselves to look beautiful, then poisoning themselves faster to hide the evidence. This was not a flaw in the system. This was the system. In the Han Dynasty, a dancer named Zhao Feiyan rose from poverty to become empress through a single asset. Her body moved as though it weighed nothing. Court records claimed she could dance on a man's palm. The emperor was captivated, but Zhao Feiyan understood what captivation was worth in a palace housing hundreds of women competing for one man's attention. Everything, until it faded. And when it faded, a woman didn't simply lose favor. She was stripped of her rank, her resources, her name, reduced to a ghost in the palace's forgotten quarters. So she turned to the breath-stopping pill, Wan. The compound was formulated from musk, ginseng, and deer horn, pressed into a pellet and inserted directly into the navel, where it dissolved into the bloodstream. The effects were extraordinary. Her skin became luminously pale. Her body emitted a constant fragrance that required no perfume. The emperor could not stay away. See, what made the Wan effective was the musk, a substance potent enough to alter the body's chemistry from the inside out. And it did. The musk that made her irresistible was simultaneously destroying her uterine lining with every dose. She and her sister Zhao Hede used the Wan for years. When the royal physician finally examined them, his diagnosis was blunt. The musk had poisoned their meridians beyond repair. He prescribed baths of sheep azalea extract to draw out the toxins. The reproductive damage was permanent. In a system where producing a male heir was a woman's only guarantee of surviving the emperor's death, Zhao Feiyan had traded her fertility for fragrance. The succession crisis that followed helped destabilize the dynasty. Her sister was compelled to end her own life, and Zhao Feiyan followed. The Wan was an extreme measure, but the logic behind it: sacrifice the body to hold the emperor's gaze, operated at every level of harem beauty, across every dynasty. The most universal sacrifice was invisible. For lip color, women across every era painted their mouths with cinnabar rouge, a vivid red mineral containing mercury, mixed with animal fats and applied directly where trace amounts entered the bloodstream with every meal and every sip of tea. Over years of cumulative exposure, the mercury produced a condition modern medicine calls mercurial erethism: extreme mood swings, hallucinations, paranoid delusions, uncontrollable agitation. Now, the sudden bouts of apparent madness, documented in court records of disgraced consorts, the behavior that justified their demotion and confinement, may not have been madness at all. They may have been the final stages of mercury poisoning, witnessed by people who had no framework for what they were seeing. The cosmetics a woman applied each morning to maintain her position could quietly drive her to the behavior that justified losing it. What changed over the centuries was not the willingness to suffer. It was the form the suffering took. In the Tang Dynasty, beauty was cosmetic, but the body remained functional. Women played polo, rode horses, and wore masculine boots in the streets. The physical cost of beauty sat on the surface: layers of lead powder, cinnabar rouge, elaborate hairpieces, but it didn't immobilize the wearer. By the Song and Ming dynasties, that freedom vanished. The widespread adoption of foot binding, chanzu, moved beauty from chemistry into orthopedics. The 4 smaller toes of young girls were fractured, folded under the sole, and bound until the foot shrank to 10 centimeters. The idealized 3-inch golden lotus. A critical exception existed inside the Forbidden City itself. Ming palace maids were forbidden from binding their feet because the palace needed them to walk. The Qing dynasty inherited this aesthetic, but rejected the method. The Manchu rulers banned foot binding for their own women, recognizing the devastation it caused. But the cultural desire for a delicate, restricted gait persisted. Their solution was mechanical: platform shoes, 花盆底鞋, with a wooden pedestal 3 to 7 centimeters thick, centered directly under the midfoot. The design shifted the body's center of gravity forward, collapsed the natural arch, and forced every step through a single point under the ball of the foot. The sharp clack of wood on stone echoed off the high palace walls, and the feet were only the foundation. Above the platform shoes, the hands were disabled. High-ranking women grew their fingernails to 7 or 8 inches and encased them in custom-fitted nail guards. 指甲, tao, ornate metal tubes of gold, silver, or jade, some stretching over 14 centimeters. The message was singular. This woman does not work. She cannot feed herself, dress herself, or grasp a teacup without a servant's hands. In the harem's logic, total physical dependency was the highest status a woman could project. Above the nail guards, the head bore the heaviest burden. During the reign of Qianlong, consorts wore the two-handle headdress, 两把头, a style built from a woman's own hair, wound tightly around a flat jade or gold hairpin called the bianfeng. It was substantial but organic. As the empire's wealth peaked and tributary jewels flooded the inner court, the sheer mass of ornamentation exceeded what human hair could support. The result was the large wing headdress, a rigid, board-like crown built on a skeleton of iron wire, padded with layers of glued fabric, wrapped in black satin, and mounted entirely separate from the wearer's natural hair. It measured 30 centimeters across and 10 centimeters tall before a single jewel was added. Think about what that means for a neck. To anchor the natural hair beneath this structure, palace maids applied a viscous resin called wood shaving water, extracted from soaking elm shavings in hot water, and combed it through the hair, pulling everything fiercely backward. The resin dried into a hard lacquer, cementing the hair in place. In Beijing's summer heat, this organic adhesive rotted directly on the scalp, producing a stench masked only by heavy perfume. The constant tension on the follicles caused permanent hair loss, a fate that pursued even the most powerful woman in the empire. Dramas like Story of Yanxi Palace get this timeline right. Set during Tianlong's reign, the show correctly depicts the smaller, hair-based style. But Ruyi's royal love in The Palace and My Fair Princess, both also set during Tianlong's era, dress their characters in the massive dalachi. That crown didn't exist for another century. It was a late Qing invention, credited to the era of Cixi. Every scene featuring Tianlong's consorts in the dalachi is a costuming error spanning 100 years. A consort wearing the full apparatus, the dalachi, the nail guards, the platform shoes, could not turn her head quickly, use her hands, or walk without assistance. She was, by design, a living ornament. Helplessness, performed at this scale, was the empire's most expensive advertisement. These beauty systems didn't just damage the women who used them, they could be turned against a rival with devastating precision. Because toxic substances like mercury, lead, and musk were already embedded in the daily cosmetic routine, they provided perfect camouflage for sabotage. A rival's face cream could carry heavier concentrations of mercury. A pregnant consort's incense could be enriched with musk, the same compound that destroyed Zhao Feiyan, to threaten the pregnancy. In Empresses in the Palace, the emperor unknowingly gives a consort musk-laced incense that renders her infertile. The drama exaggerates the speed. A single whiff doesn't trigger a crisis, but modern pharmacological analysis confirms that natural musk causes severe contractions in uterine smooth muscle, posing genuine reproductive danger. The historical fear was medically grounded. Look, weaponized beauty wasn't always covert. In the Liang dynasty, a woman named Xu Zhaopei turned cosmetics into an act of open defiance. Married to Xiao Yi, a prince who was blind in one eye, she invented what became known as the half-face makeup, 半面妆. Every time he visited her chambers, she applied full cosmetics to only one vertical half of her face. The side he could see was flawless. The side he couldn't was bare. She was painting his disability onto her own skin, daring him to acknowledge what the entire court pretended not to notice. Xiao Yi eventually became emperor. He publicized her supposed infidelities and forced her to end her own life. Her body was thrown down a well. She had weaponized the makeup table against a man who could weaponize the state. These were weapons wielded between rivals and against husbands, lateral strikes within a shared system. What the Jiaqing emperor demanded in the Ming dynasty was something else entirely. He became consumed by Taoist immortality alchemy, and his alchemists required a specific ingredient, the first menstrual blood of virgin girls, called red lead. Over 200 girls, aged 13 and 14, were confined within the palace. They were denied normal food, given only mulberry leaves and rainwater to keep their bodily fluids pure, and forced to swallow toxic, heavy metal-laced drugs to induce bleeding. Girls died by the dozens, from starvation and chemical poisoning, their bodies disposed of as spent material. In 1542, a palace maid named Yang Jingying decided that dying while fighting was preferable to surviving inside that system. She organized 16 fellow maids, and in the middle of the night, they wrapped a silk cord around the emperor's throat. The knot fumbled. He survived. Every woman involved, along with their extended families, was executed. The Jiaqing emperor continued his elixirs for another 2 decades. The mercury and lead in his own compounds eventually killed him. The same feedback loop that destroyed the faces of his consorts scaled to the body of the Son of Heaven. At the opposite end of the harem's beauty economy stood a woman who survived the system longer than anyone else, not by escaping its demands, but by finding other bodies to absorb them. Cixi drank human breast milk daily for nearly half a century. This was not a personal eccentricity. It was a state-managed operation. The Imperial Household Department maintained a dedicated bureau that kept 40 seasonal wet nurses on active rotation and 80 more on standby, all separated from their own newborns and confined to the palace. These women were fed an unsalted diet of fatty pork shoulders and chicken broth, under the medical belief that salt contaminated the milk, without salt to cut the grease. Every meal was a nauseating film of bland animal fat, mandated by the state, inescapable. Their milk was collected daily and served warm to Cixi with the reverence afforded a rare medicine. These women were not servants. They were biological infrastructure maintained for the extraction of a single fluid, then rotated out and replaced. She maintained an equally elaborate personal grooming apparatus, the full mechanics of which, from the 28 attendants required for a single bathing session to the protocol governing each silk towel, are their own story and one we've told in full. But Cixi's dominion over the beauty system was not total. As the years advanced, the constant tension of the elaborate hairstyles took its toll, dozens of strands coming free with every washing. For a woman whose authority was inseparable from her commanding physical presence, this was a private catastrophe. She turned on her closest confidant, violently beating the powerful eunuch Li Lianying and overturning copper basins in a fury. To save his own life, Li Lianying coerced the imperial physician into formulating a medicinal hair powder. It worked, barely. Then, in the summer of 1900, the beauty system collapsed entirely when the Eight-Nation Alliance breached Beijing's gates during the Boxer Rebellion. Cixi fled the Forbidden City, disguised as a peasant. She ordered a servant to take heavy shears and sever her fingernails, the same nails she had cultivated for years, sheathed in jade and gold, proof that her hands existed only to command. They were left behind on the floor of a palace she might never see again. The nails grew back. The empire did not. Put it this way, in the Tang dynasty, a palace woman could ride a horse. By the Song dynasty, she could barely cross a courtyard. By the late Qing, turning her head risked a spinal injury, grasping a teacup required a servant's hands, and taking a single step meant balancing on a wooden stilt. The direction was always the same, toward greater immobility, greater dependency, greater physical cost. Nearly 50,000 acres of agricultural land were designated as rouge land, taxed and allocated purely to fund the cosmetic stipends of imperial princesses. The system was industrial, and the women who bore its consequences most heavily were never the empresses or the Empress Dowagers. They were the low-ranking consorts who used the cheapest, most toxic grades of lead because they couldn't afford better, the palace maids who spent hours dressing someone else's hair while their own scalps went untreated, and the wet nurses stripped from their infants and fed unsalted pork until their bodies produced milk for someone else's preservation. Cixi survived the beauty system by outsourcing its consequences. The women below her had no one to outsource to. The cosmetics faded each evening. The headdresses were dismantled. The platform shoes came off behind closed doors, but the lead stayed in the bloodstream. The hair follicles never recovered. The damaged feet never fully healed. Beauty in the Imperial Harem was always a transaction. Youth and health exchanged for proximity to power, and the debt always came due. What none of these women could control was whether the emperor would even glance in their direction. The selection process that brought them into the Forbidden City, the ranking system that stratified them once inside, the bedroom protocols that determined who would be summoned and who would wait for decades. Those mechanisms decided everything, and for the women who navigated them, beauty was only the price of entry. What happened after the door closed was governed by a different system entirely, one that tracked, timed, and surveilled every encounter with the same bureaucratic precision used to administer the lead and the milk and the platform shoes.